According to official data, less than 10% of the population allegedly lives below the poverty line in Russia. This is a historical minimum, but amid unprecedented sanctions pressure, record spending on the war against Ukraine, corruption of the federation's leadership, as well as a large number of mobilized and emigrated from the country, such indicators at least do not inspire confidence. The fact is that Putin instructed to halve the poverty rate in Russia by 2030 to 6.5%. In order to achieve the coveted indicator, they decided not to develop the economy, but simply to change the calculation method. Now, those who live worse than others in the region are recognized as poor.
They introduced new formulas for calculating the number of the poor only at the end of 2021. And these formulas, they were originally such that the number of poor turned out to be very small according to them. This was incorporated into the design of the formula itself. According to my calculation, it turns out that no less than 20 million people are actually poor now, according to the old methodology that was adopted. These methodologies were not perfect, but even according to them, if they had not been changed, there would have been about 20 million.
In other words, every 14th Russian citizen survives on an amount that is less than the subsistence level, and to live on this minimum is virtually impossible, and the Russians will continue to get poorer. It is important to understand that this is not a direct effect of the sanctions, because they are primarily aimed at the regime's ability to continue the war against Ukraine, but the consequences of the policy of the Russian leadership.
Last year, the real incomes of Russian citizens fell by about 6 to 7%. They began to buy less food or any other goods by about 6 to 7% too. This year, there will be a similar situation. For 2 years of the Russian war, the standard for living of citizens will decrease by approximately 12 to 13%.
Russia's revenues for an incomplete year and a half of a full-scale war against Ukraine, both oil and gas and others, were declining. Due to a record hole in the budget, Moscow started printing money. The consequences of such a decision are predictable. Emission, inflation, devaluation. At the same time, expenses are growing, primarily on aggression. The Federation authorities spent every third ruble from the state treasury on the so-called special military operation. At the same time, funding for the social sphere is being cut.
The problem is that when you cut spending on the social sector, including medicine, the salaries of teachers and doctors, and do not provide the necessary indexation for the level of inflation that the Russian state itself spends up in addition to what was originally predicted, it is necessary to spend even more on repressive apparatus. The cost of the repressive apparatus is perhaps the only thing that more or less continues to actively grow.
According to the Federal State Statistics Service, in addition to the number of the poor, the unemployment rate also reached a historical minimum, only 3.3%. According to the Russian authorities, this is a confirmation that the Russian economy has coped with the Western sanctions and other consequences of the war they unleashed. They call them risks. But in fact, the reason for the low level of unemployment was, among other things, high emigration from the country, mobilization and massive losses at the front line, and the result was a shortage of personnel.
Why did the number of unemployed, legal unemployed, registered unemployed decrease so sharply in the Russian Federation? Because firstly, a lot of people left. It was the people who formed the basis of the able-bodied population. Secondly, already today there is a severe shortage of a certain category of personnel and a speciality in Russia. First of all, we are talking about production specialities, about engineering and technical workers.
At first glance, this situation may seem like luck for Russian job seekers, because employers raise wages not because people have begun to work better, but because there is simply no one to work. But in the long run, the labor market deficit will hurt the efficiency and productivity of the Russian economy. Reported by Diana Kolesnik, Valeria Nekapelova, UATV News.